Now that Chuck Norris is the memes man, his popularity seems to have always been at its peak. However, that is untrue. In the West, Chuck was never a particularly well-known actor, and most of his films only made pennies at the box office. The actor's career in the 1980s and 1990s was non-existent, and all of his successes came at the start of the 21st century, when he began to be awarded medals of honor and gained popularity. Is the same collection of facts about Chuck, which is how we all discovered that Chuck once squeezed lemon juice, and twice quietly counted to infinity. Today I'd like to take a look back at that career and highlight some of its most exciting moments. Chuck's first role in a big movie was his appearance in Bruce Lee's The Way of the Dragon. He got there by an acquaintance. At the start of his career, he is similar to Steven Seagal. Only Steven took off very quickly, and Chuck had to wait a while. Being the world karate champion in the heavyweight division opened a chain of sports schools, which on the wave of popularity of martial arts, visited many Hollywood stars. One of these stars was the famous American actor Steve McQueen. McQueen introduced Chuck to the creator of The Way of the Dragon. The resounding success of Bruce Lee at the box office worldwide made famous not only Bruce, who played a significant role in the film. Part of the glory went to Norris, who was in the movie as the villain. Immediately after The Way of the Dragon, he signed on for another role as the villain in the Hong Kong film Slaughter in San Francisco. The picture fell through even although its small budget criticized Chuck himself. After such offensive failure, he left the cinema for several years. The actor returned with a small film Breaker. It was a purely American film. The actor's previous films had been the work of Hong Kong filmmakers. The film was mediocre and wasn't even released in the United States. But then Chuck lucked out with the action film Good Guys Wore Black. Cost only $1 million and was a big hit, gathering in cinemas $19 million. For American audiences, this film is one of the most famous films of the actor. In The Expendables 2, the reference was to this movie. It was Good Guys Wear Black. Chuck calls the turning point of his life. The agreement to star in it meant that he preferred the acting profession, not sports. His subsequent works, A Force of One and The Octagon, again grossed about $20 million in theaters. Chuck was predicted a great future, and his royalties rose to $500,000 per role. A well-known story attributes the success of A Force of One to Keanu Reeves. The fact is that the film's director, Paul Aaron, was in a relationship with Keanu's mother. Despite the fact that Aaron was divorced by the time the film was made, he and Keanu had a good relationship. And he went to various movies and theaters with him, including Bruce Lee's Way of the Dragon. According to the story, Keanu persuaded Aaron to take Norris on a new movie. However, after 3 successful films in a row, Norris's career turned for the worse. In 1981, the most expensive movie in the act was followed by Chuck's most costly film, An Eye for an Eye. The movie failed unexpectedly at a budget of $5 million and was able to make only $7 million. What's most surprising of all, films with Norris in the leading role at the time, which received the best reviews from audiences and critics alike. The film's failure is attributed to the film's lack of a big studio as a distributor and the unfortunate release date. At the same time, the horror film An American Werewolf in London was released, which earned $30 million in theaters and quickly became a cult movie. After An Eye for an Eye failed, another Norris action film Forced Vengeance, with the same budget at the box office, the film grossed $1 million less. Chuck likely realized that something had to change, and after Forced Vengeance, he made an unconventional film for himself. The sci-fi horror flick Silent Rage. Judging by the number of viewer ratings, it's one of the most obscure Norris films right now. But in those years, he received the best reviews of the actor's career from critics at the time. You can't call Chuck and the Zombie Fight a success, but you can't call it a failure. With a budget of $4 million, the film collected $10 million in theaters. And then came 1983, which probably saw the release of Chuck Norris' most famous film. Lone Wolf McQuade was released in 1983. Didn't do so well at the box office, but they could get the money back. With $5 million spent on the film's production, at the box office collected $12 million. Rumor has it that the producers would like to see the main antagonist in place, Bruce Lee, and if the actor had been alive in the early 80s, they would have offered him the role. After that, the film's slogan would change to The Century's Revenge. Chuck is very fond of this film and eagerly talks about working on it. There is one of the most characteristic only for Chuck moments where he jumps out of the ground in an SUV. This role is the prototype of the Walker, Texas Ranger television series. The main problem with Lone Wolf McQuade at the box office was that it was the most expensive movie of Chuck's career, and the box office was very small due to a series of box office failures in a row. The big independent studios turned down the actor. He had to sign a contract with a film company, Canon, which at that time produced pictures with meager budgets, and its main objective was the video market. This film company was responsible for the American Ninja series. Van Damme owes a debt of gratitude to the company, which gave him a modest budget for his first films so that he eventually made it to the big Hollywood studios, initially with Chuck at Canon also. All went well. His movie, Missing in Action, with a budget of only $2 million, grossed $23 million in US cinemas. The film was Chuck's most significant success in his career. It's the most money his movies have ever collected. In Missing in Action, there is a memorable episode that many still remember, when Chuck rises from the water with the legendary machine gun. The massive success of the painting Missing in Action briefly breathed life into the actor's career, and he was invited to his film by a big Hollywood studio. The studio was Orion, which produced The Terminator by James Cameron and RoboCop by Paul Verhoeven. The joint work of Norris and Orion Studios was the action film Code of Silence. An actor's career is ranked #1 by critics and American viewers. Code of Silence was the actor's last big hit in cinemas. $7 million budget and $21 million box office receipts. Perhaps the whole is that the script was written for Clint Eastwood, but Clint refused to star in it, which is even funnier. But Chuck accidentally got into the movie. Because of the stalled filming of Invasion Us, he decided to star in Code of Silence. Norris would later call Code of Silence his favorite movie. Because of the great success of Missing in Action, the Canon studio decided to make 2 sequels. The second film was still able to bring money to the studio, although the box office collected only $11 million. It is believed that Chuck Norris is one of the reasons for the bankruptcy of the Canon Group. Because of faith in it, a small studio began to invest in the actor's films more and more money, at the same time trying to expand and increase the number of movies produced per year. There was no result. It did not help the studio and Sylvester Stallone with the most expensive studio film Over the Top. In the second half of the 80s, the studio began to fall apart, budgets of films getting smaller and smaller, and the studio eventually ceased to exist, passing its entire media library to the judges of MGM. In the early 90s, after several failures in a row, Norris finally got rid of his contract with Canon and starred in the box office success Sick Kicks. Chuck didn't star in it, but the idea for the film was entirely, and he found the money for it. That same year, he got an offer from CBS. Chuck said yes and went to the small screen with the Walker, Texas Ranger series. The show wasn't a big hit on American television, but an average of 13 million people watched it at the equator. Now that would be crazy numbers for any channel, but back then, it was a little above average. Magnum P.I. was averaging 22 million viewers. The X-Files had 20 million viewers. Friends was quietly reaching the 40 million viewer mark. It was too low for CBS at the time. Chuck would have been forgotten long ago if not for the internet. The actor became an internet meme, and his fame skyrocketed. And it got him a part in The Expendables. He was even offered to include any fictional facts in the movie. The reality was chosen by Chuck's wife, who favored the point about the snake that died in agony just by biting Chuck. Now Norris is doing great at 82, he's writing books, he's participating in events and openly resents the double standard politics that is so popular right now.